wabarakatuh. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's ID at INCEIF talk. ID stands for Intellectual Discovery. I'm Dr. Ali Zhang, head of a program for Master of Science in Islamic Finance at INCEIF University. Today, I'm honored to welcome our guest, Mr. Omar Shaikh, to give our enlightening session on unlocking Islamic Sustainable Finance. So for those who are joining us for the first time for ID at INCEIF, now I want to give a brief introductions about in ID series. It is a monthly hybrid talks series designed to bring together scholars, experts, industry leaders to discuss and share insights on emerging topics in finance, economics, and beyond. Through this discussion, we aim to foster deeper understanding and collaboration within Islamic banking and finance industry. So today, our topic is unlocking Islamic sustainable finance. It is both a timely and essential topic. As the global financial landscape shifts towards sustainability and ethical finance, the role of Islamic finance in contributing to the broader sustainable agenda is increasingly being recognized. So at INCEIF, we also recognize this growing importance of sustainability in finance. That's why we have our professional certificate in sustainable management. We have our MBA in sustainable management. And most of our courses have integrated sustainable development and sustainable financing in the project paper and in the assignment. So let me introduce our honorable speaker for today's session. Today we have Mr. Omar Shaikh, who is the managing director of the London-based Global Ethical Financial Initiatives, or in short, GEFI. He is a chartered accountant by profession. He has an extensive background in audit and private equity, with a specialization in ESG. Since 2009, he has led numerous sector development initiatives and advised financial institutions across London, GCC, and Africa. So his expertise extends to working with the government and the regulator in developing policies and a regulatory framework that enable Islamic finance. One of the notable one is he collaborated with the United Nations Development Program to develop and launch the pioneering SDG financial product platform. Beyond his professional engagement, Mr. Omar also holds advisory roles with esteemed organizations such as UK Islamic Finance Council, Prince Trust Scotland, Oxford University Faith Aligned Impact Finance. Now, we are truly honored to have Mr. Omar with us today to share his insights on Islamic Sustainable Finance. Before I invite Mr. Omar for today's sharing session, let me introduce the structure of today's talk. Okay, so today, Mr. Omar, following my introduction, Mr. Omar will deliver his presentation about 25 minutes. And then since today's session is a hybrid session, we have participants from this classroom, as well as the audience in Zoom online. So for after the presentation, 25 minutes of a presentation, we will invite the audience to raise questions. And for those who are physically presenting in this venue, then you can raise your hand. Then I can pass the mic to you to raise the question, and Mr. Omar will address your question. For those who are online, please leave your message on the chat box. So I'll pick up the comment and the question and read out to Mr. Omar for his reply. Okay, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Omar Shaikh for his insightful presentation today. You start.
And Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, so a real pleasure to be with everyone here today. Indeed, I feel two conflicting feelings. One, a bit of an imposter because I have a lot of my teachers and ustads and amazing people in this room. I can see around the table. I've had the pleasure of engaging with a number of you over the last couple of days. But also a lovely feeling of being home. We've been together with Dr. Akram and the team here at ISRA, and I saw INCEIF being formed during the early days of my career in Islamic finance with Ernst & Young. And it's so nice to see the progress of INCEIF and ISRA over the last nearly two decades, I think it is, nearly 20 years. So, alhamdulillah, really nice to be here with you all. Right, so the quick caveats. I'm not a scholar, I'm not a theologian, I'm not an academic like many of you here as well. I'm going to be sharing my views specifically from a practitioner lens. I'll try to pull out some of the kind of philosophical considerations that underpin some of the debate, but I can't go into too much depth on that side. I'll try and make it as interactive as possible, so I'll be brief in the presentation and allow more time for the conversation. Right, so framing Islamic sustainable finance is the topic. Okay, first things first, the wording, right? This part of the world, you love the word maqasid. Yep, maqasid aligned. We've had these conversations in the industry, asset-backed, asset-based, letter of the law, spirit of the law. So my first suggestion is let's not get hung up over the words, right? Let's take the conversation deeper to the next layer. Within the mainstream sustainable finance world, we have our own issues with taxonomy as to what it means, what the different terms mean, etc. So we have this scenario today of a kind of alphabet spaghetti of acronyms that exist. But the real question is, actually, how did we get here? Why is it today that I'm standing here talking to you all about sustainable finance? What was wrong with finance before? Was it unsustainable? Was there some major issue, right? Well, guess what? That's exactly right. That's what it was. The form of capitalism and the form of finance that we had historically has not considered people and planet to the same extent as it has considered profit. The negative externalities of what we see in our business activities are not recorded on our financial statements. So we find ourselves today having this conversation on sustainable finance. For me, it's particularly interesting because when I started off my career in the late 90s in corporate finance, actually in M&A, we had this situation of the dot-com. And it was fascinating. If you added those three little things, a dot and COM, the valuation of your business quadrupled. And I was like, this is really weird. How does this work? Doesn't make much sense to me. As a young, naive lad, I was in the city of London, and I started asking questions about ethical finance. What about ethical finance? And by the way, at this point, I knew nothing about Islamic finance whatsoever. My father knew some stuff, and I would sometimes listen to him, as you sometimes do as a young lad. You know, often you probably should listen more to your parents, but I didn't have a clue, Dr. Ali. So I was told in the city, oh, ethical finance, you're one of those funny people, right? That's for tree huggers, hippies, and for the faithy guys, go speak to the Church of England. And by the way, it's a haircut on performance, so don't come back. It doesn't add up. So this conversation, how have we moved this in 25 years? How come all of a sudden we're sitting here? And as you said in the introduction, it's a major part of finance today. Yeah. And Malaysia is the chairman of the ASEAN Business Council this year, I believe. What are the two key pillars? Everywhere advertised in KL and at the airport, inclusivity and sustainability. So, wow, what's happened? Well, you realized all of a sudden that, and for me, the trigger points were very fascinating. As a young, graduate in accounting and finance, I go into the real world, and all of a sudden I see the collapse of Enron, of Parmalat, of accounting scandals, yeah? Everything I'd been taught. And by the way, at the same time, I'm just qualified as a chartered accountant, doing audit as an auditor. Everything I was taught, everything we were taught about free markets, all of a sudden, the reality, every few months, there was another corporate scandal in Europe or in the US or in the world. And it really made you question, how is our financial system run? At that point, I started learning a bit more about Islamic finance, late 1990s, early 2000s, and you begin to look at this as an alternative mechanism. But just the traditional kind of mainstream finance, the context within which we were operating, it was clear that there was a lot of challenges. And then for me, the biggest moment was Arthur Andersen collapsing. The auditor that is there to confirm and add assurance into the system and give confidence that the accounts give a what? True and fair view. All of a sudden we realize, well, hold on a minute. Who's auditing the auditor? The auditor's collapsed. The world's largest auditor at the time. These are all huge seismic incidences which have happened in the last quarter of a century. And for the astute ones amongst yourself, you've noticed I haven't even got to the global financial crisis yet. Of course, ASEAN, Malaysia had its own financial crisis in the mid-90s. But at a global level, and that was regional, but at a global level, along comes 2008, the global financial crisis. Now, at that point, for me, I noticed the pivot, because everything we had said in the past, and I remember even at a conference, I think it was an Islamic Finance conference, asking a question about narrow banking in the Chicago academics, and a very, very well-regarded professor from a top-tier university literally dismissed the question, that what planet are you on? And I just sat back down thinking, okay, I've clearly missed something, right? But all of a sudden, what happened after the global financial crisis was you realized you no longer had to ask the question about ethical finance, sustainable finance, or indeed Islamic finance. The question flipped. Hold on a minute. What happened to free market economics? What happened to efficient self-correcting markets? So no longer did we have to sit here and try and explain or unpack or even present a case for sustainable or ethical finance. But actually, you turn around and say, well, what went wrong with the current form of finance? Where did that all go wrong, right? So you don't have to tell me what's good. You just have to tell me, how you ended up in such a big mess on the other side. So subhanAllah, at that point thereafter, we ended up with commentary from all market stakeholders, from Alan Greenspan saying what we knew about free market self-correcting didn't work out, to the head of the UK regulator, Lord Turner, saying much of banking is socially useless. All of these questions and challenges, because as we know, it plunged at least most of Europe and the Western world into austerity. For the first time in living memory, we had huge queues outside banks. We had run-on banks. So that's framed the context for what the ongoing conversation of the last decade had been around responsible and sustainable finance. Unchecked capitalism threw us into this question, into this debate. Now, of course, starting that journey, all of a sudden, now, hold on a minute, our financial statements, for those of you who are accountants, would know that the non-financial reporting was very limited. If we are polluting a river and we have a factory and we're polluting a river, where exactly is the impact of that recorded on your financial statements? And your financial statements is the singular key document that dictates what? Profit, which dictates share price, yeah? And if the purpose of business, as Friedman had said, was to maximize your profits, yeah, within the law, then we have to start from that singular primary document. And in there, we realize there's actually a huge set of gaps there, and there are limitations. And of course, it's a true and fair view. Auditors are a watchdog, not a kind of hound dog, whatever we used to say, but there is judgment involved in that space. And clearly, the reality was we got those judgments wrong. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the global financial, right? So that's important that we locate this conversation you're seeing today within that. It is not the case that all of a sudden our financiers, our accountants, our politicians just woke up and had a moral conscience and said, oh, we need to think about sustainability. We need to consider these factors. Frankly, in reality, that's not the case. Not a whole bunch of socialists who start to take over the world. Our markets near collapsed. They were bailed out by us as public, as taxpayers. And threw the system onto its knees. Okay. And by the way, all of my friends in Islamic finance, everyone I speak to, always talked about these risks of the fractional reserve system, talked about the risks and the challenges of debt, the instability that it builds inherently into your economic models and markets. And now we were seeing some of this play out. So now starts the journey in the mainstream side around sustainable finance. Well, how can this look? How should it look? Some people are asking questions at a systemic level. Other people are getting straight into this. And the other major trend that we're seeing at this point is climate change. Now, climate change, of course, has been going on for a long time. And at the Rio COP and others, we've been saying for some time that actually we need to get behind this. There have been climate deniers. There have been people who've been muddying the science. But in the last decade and a half, it's become unequivocal. You can't really deny what you see with your own eyes with regards to the weather pattern changes and the floods, the droughts, the wildfires. There's not a month that goes by without, or 2 months or a quarter, without records being broken one way or the other. So as we saw the emergence of the acceptance and in the urgency around climate, we started to get a bunch of activities and activism around net zero, around carbon footprint, around all of these components. So that was some of the context very briefly, and there's a lot more there as to how we got here. Why are we talking about sustainable finance today? Where is that conversation located in the actual conventional markets? Right. And then we say, okay, well, hold on a minute. And this is what the topic here is about, is Islamic sustainable finance, right? So, of course, in Islamic finance, what did we have at the time? We had a global industry in the last, now roughly $4.5 trillion, nearly $5 trillion. Okay, sorry, I don't know what I've done. That's fine, thank you. We have an Islamic finance industry, which wasn't me, I didn't touch anything on that one, right? Which is... I need glasses now, so I'm struggling with this. We have an Islamic finance industry, which is what? Greener than green, whiter than white. We are the best. We know it all. Look, I told you so. You got it all wrong. Capitalism has failed. You should have followed Islamic finance. Yep. But on the other side, let me be honest, because I can be honest, I'm amongst friends here. I'm former head of Islamic finance for EY in London. I went out to Bahrain in 2005, learned about the industry. So I spent roughly 23 years intellectually curious in the sector. And I used to sit here and wonder, why is it we're accounting like this, the exact same we account for it? Because we take a substance over form approach. That was what we were told in life as auditors, as accountants. We account for this the exact same way we do conventional. This commodity muraba is a fascinating construct, isn't it, everyone? Everyone's giggling, right? So you guys are all experts here, right? Commodity muraba is so fascinating that we started a whole debate between commodity muraba and its ugly cousin tawarruk, right? Which went on for years and years and years. And so. And I mean this with all regard to the scholars, so I don't wish to in any way, please don't misunderstand me. For me personally, and this is a very personal view, I did not find it intellectually interesting because I thought this makes no difference in the planet. This is a synthetic debt replication. Personal view, caveat, before I get kicked out of here, right? So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what about the planet? What about people? What about profit? What about purpose? How do you put barakah as a concept into an Excel sheet? Because we're doing some funky DCFs to get great valuations on .coms, right? So can we do something funky here? Can we move the debate on? But Islamic finance, for me personally, I found was stagnating in that space where nearly chasing its tail. Of course, it's important what it was doing. I do not dismiss that in any way whatsoever. But there was an element, for sure, we called it in our strategy consulting adaptation, or we called it copy-paste, or some people called it imitate, as opposed to innovate, moving beyond compliance. That was the title of some research I did once. So we have that scenario in Islamic banking going on around about the time of this global financial crisis. So then the conversation moved to me was, well, we've got a negative screening approach, right? And actually, I think I was with Dr. Akram just left there, and a few others at the Malaysian Pavilion at COP28. And I asked Maybank CEOs and some of the biggest banks, can you today give me a net Sharia compliant net zero pension? Right? And Malaysia is a global leader, right? So for anyone I'm going to ask, I'm going to ask you guys, right? So we get that? And at the time, the answer, at least at the time, was no. So whilst on the one end, we adopt a negative screening approach of do no harm, which we understand from Sharia, from the Qawaid, takes priority over trying to do a good. I get that. But nonetheless, we were not looking at some other very, very important factors that we were looking at in the mainstream sustainability space, which I said was what? Climate, carbon footprint, and so on and so forth. So green, not really registering there. People, the S in ESG, what about supply chains? We might finance it through a Sukuk or a Sharia compliant structure, but are we looking at the activities of the business and its supply chain, and so on and so forth? Sorry, that's zoomed out. I started asking, so these were some of the questions we had. And what we did as the UKIC and GEFI, we started this intellectual discourse with your chairman here at Tansfi Azman and others, are using the concept, as it says in Quran, of tayyib. So it mentions many times halal and tayyiban, right? So we took inspiration from that concept. And for those who, most of you I'm sure are familiar, but everything which the majority opinion is very clear. Everything which is tayyib is halal, but not everything which is halal is tayyib. Okay? Tayyib is mentioned, can't remember what, 42 plus times in Quran. And it can be in your speech, it can be in your behavior, it can be in food, it can be in many things. So we took inspiration from that narrative. We said, well, if we were to locate what we're doing in mainstream sustainable finance within Islamic finance, we need to speak the language of the industry. Yep. So what is that? And the approach we therefore took was actually around, number one, and it's very important to note, the work that was done by the pioneers in creating from concept to reality is hugely commendable in the Islamic finance world. They made a Sharia compliant halal version, and a lot of credit goes to the pioneers actually here in Malaysia, from Governor Zeti and Governor Zeti's father and many of the amazing scholars here and around the world for that matter, in Bahrain and Jeddah and so on. And I've learned this from my elders, Professor Iqbal Asari and others who I've had the honor and pleasure to learn from over the years, Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi and others. What that activity has produced was absolutely phenomenal. Okay? So they managed to take an idea from the Islamic economics books and Markfield and other places in the 70s and experiment and actually create an operating banking modality. So for us, that is not something to question. It is something that is there, is real, and is actually commendable. Of course, it has its pluses and minuses, it has its limitations, but that is hugely commendable. It's only on the shoulder of those giants that we can even now begin to talk about, can we complement that? Can we augment it by adding in additional factors? So it's halal now. What can we do to make it more tayyib inspired? And therein lies the question of what I think Malaysia refers to in terms of its maqasid driving factors, a higher sensitivity to sustainability factors, and indeed addresses some of the challenges in the industry around authenticity. So this is where you start asking the question, which is intellectually extremely fascinating, right? Okay, so it's halal. Now, what we're going to do? We're going to layer on enhanced sustainability considerations to be tayyib, right? Or tayyib light, or tayyib inspired, right? What do those sustainability considerations look like? What are they? Could they be? What should they be? Okay, starting point, mainstream sustainability. You remember the previous slide I told you about, showed maybe 50 odd different frameworks, right, that we're doing. GRI reporting standards, impact investing standards, UN Sustainable Development Goals, we use that, right? How many goals are there? 17 goals. How many targets to underpin them? 169 targets, yeah? 200 plus milestones that go in. Are they all Sharia compliant? Do they align? Do they not align? Which ones do, which ones don't? The reality is, guess what, guys? 95% of them you would align with. We did research with ISRA. We issued 2-3 bits of thought leadership paper to say actually where the differences are. But otherwise, there's a 95% convergence and alignment. But also, guess what, folks? The mainstream sustainability world happens to follow a similar path to the Islamic finance world. When one scholar said this is halal and the other scholar said that's not halal, and so on and so forth, the conversations begin. We have a lot of tension points in mainstream sustainability. Yep. If you remember last year, we had a tobacco company that had a higher sustainability rating than Tesla, than an EV company, right? So you're thinking, hold on a minute, this doesn't all add up, right? You've got your problems as well. Absolutely. And it's not free from these issues, not free from the charity. It's dogged with a lot of issues of greenwashing, virtue signaling, and so on and so forth. And in addition to that, we also found that whilst there were tension points and a lot of similarities, we also found when speaking to the scholars here, actually with Dr. Marjan and the team, and with Tansri Azman really emphasized this point and taught me this, that in the Islamic finance world, we have the Sharia. The Sharia is the North Star. So we don't need to copy everything that's going on in conventional. What can we do when we look at our own North Star? So when you actually look at your North Star, you start from a bit more of an ontological consideration. What is the purpose of wealth? Yeah? How does your rizq being written for you? We know in Hadith, this is one of the few things which is preordained, yeah? We know when we'll die, we know how much our rizq will be, right? How does that change your engagement and your behavior with money? We know we'll be held to account for every penny we earned. That's why they say the miskeen will get into Jannah many years before the people with wealth, right? Okay? How does that change our relationship with money and how we spend our behavior patterns? I talked about barakah into an Excel sheet. We talked about rizq. We also know from all faith groups, sorry, my 20-minute counter. We also know from all faith groups that, and others of different faiths and no faiths, that what is the purpose of money, right? Happiness. It's actually the pursuit of happiness, which is more important. Some people even say it's love that makes the world go round, you know? And normally in an audience of capitalists, they'll mock me and throw me out of the room at that point. So there's a different concept. There are different beliefs underpin the Islamic system. And anyone know which SDG stands for spirituality? Come on, the UN SDGs. This is the global goals. 192 countries have signed up to this. We all need to go on this path. Which one stands for spirituality? Exactly. So they don't actually have one spirituality, right? So what's our core essence is our role as our spiritual purpose. Of course, under peace and justice, you could say some of them kind of relate to that. But when I was in the Vatican, speaking with my colleagues there, it was a fascinating learning from them how they engaged the Vatican at a very late stage in being involved in trying to frame the SDGs and set them. So the faith community that large were not particularly well represented in putting the global goals together for the planet. So that's the kind of context here as to then it makes us think differently as to what could Islamic sustainable finance look like. And what I'll do is I'll just conclude with a slide or two on how we're seeing this in practice, and then we'll open up to Q&A. Dr. Ali, just keep me on time, please, okay, sure, if I overrun. So what are we seeing? And so what does this mean in practice? Well, the UAE Central Bank have issued regulatory guidelines, just technically, but really at a market level, does anyone really care? Who cares? I love to say the kind of show me the money right? If any of you've seen Wolf of Wall Street, right? Show me the money, right? Let's just bring this back down to good old numbers. We're all positivists, aren't we, right, in our academic leanings? So sustainable investing market, 30 to 35 trillion globally. That's including adjusted for outflows in recent years, peaked at around 40 trillion. Impact investing market now roughly 1.1 trillion. Members of the PRI, Principles of Responsible Investing, collectively their balance sheets is 120 odd trillion, right? Which is just phenomenal. PRB roughly at 90 trillion. And where's the Islamic finance market? That's where we're at today. Yep. So kind of look at the markets here. Yeah. If you can bridge and make products based on your principles, but that actually align to sustainable finance, it could be a commercial opportunity. Green and Sustainable Sukuk, actually 2014, this is now up to 14 billion of new issuances last year in the Green and Sustainable Sukuk space. We did a retail survey. We worked with Islamic banks in Pakistan, Nigeria, London, Australia, and I think somewhere else. I can't remember where else. We did 5 banks, and we asked them to ask their retail customers the exact same question. Yeah. And it was to understand what are their attitudes and expectations towards sustainable finance and things. And here's some of the findings that we took away from that, which say 96% that it's important that finance fits with their values. That's what you would expect. 90% saying that, like to see it aligned with the SDGs. And this one was very interesting. 87% of the customers said we're willing to pay a premium of nearly 4.4% if the products align with sustainability standards. So this is what the customers are saying. This is your business case for the bank executives. And interesting, the higher end of this, because that's the medium, the higher end was actually our Nigerians. So any Nigerians in the room, any Nigerians, they're very, very generous. They're willing to pay more for sustainable products. So that's great. Was the ones who were willing to pay the least extra or nothing extra. We're all from the UK, understand? Right? So there's clearly an issue there. And we've talked about Sukuk. So in conclusion, what does it mean from a finance side? Well, the market of Islamic finance is forecasted by LSEG to meet around 8 trillion by 2030. If we can point 5% of that towards sustainable finance, as defined earlier, which is not just Sharia compliant, but also meets sustainability characteristics, there's potentially a prize of nearly 400 billion there that could be used, targeted in sustainable finance initiative, be they green, renewable energy, SDG linked, social impact linked, etc. But potentially the even bigger prize is winning back the heart of Islamic finance, which I think all of you in this room, as the researchers, as the professors, as the academics, as the practitioners, have a disproportionate opportunity and role to play, because Malaysia, as the epicenter of Islamic finance and the amazing work you've done over the last 40 years, you're the people coming from here that can win back that heart and soul of Islamic finance and take that out to a wider and a bigger audience. So on that note, thank you very much.
That you are talking about is much more lighter than that. So perhaps from other part of the world, there's a 90 definitions of Tanzania Sustainable and so what is you insight with that?
So we've been talking about this concept of tayyib for a long time. But in 2022, we did some analysis in 2009, 10, 11. In 2022, we actually brought together a small group of people and did some focused R&D with a view to that at COP, we can release something or preview something at COP 28, which was December 23. If you noticed, I always use the word tayyib inspired, because the first thing I realized was that through all these discussions, we had focus groups with scholars here. We had GSG for Impact, GIN on the board, Fudger Capital on the board, global asset managers on the board, Simmons & Simmons, and some boutique private equity firms. We collectively got together and said, okay, how can we take this into something that can be applied? The first thing we did was that we used the word tayyib inspired, Because as soon as you use the term tayyib alone, then you go into scriptural, kind of literary definitions and scriptural definitions, and then you go purely into the world that the scholars must lead and navigate us on, right? Okay, so we actually sidestepped part of that question. We just said it's tayyib inspired. So excellent, it's halal, great, no one's got a problem. Fantastic. But how can we be tayyib inspired as well, right? So the classic analogies that are always given, there's chicken, but there's organic chicken, kind of thing, and all of these different things. So that's what we used. And now we then layered on top of that, we created the kind of Islamic Sustainable Investing platform as a kind of beta thing, which took the following methodology. Has to be Sharia compliant. Then it looked at 4 asset classes, which was debt capital markets, equity capital markets, real estate, and private equity as a proxy for impact. We looked at those 4 financial asset classes, and we said, what is leading market practice from the 100 frameworks? Because of our jobs in GEFI, we were able to say, these are the top 3 that you need to buy. How do you align with the leading market frameworks for sustainability? And if you don't align, why not? Yeah. Sure. So if you want to issue, we would say SRI Sukuk, yeah? How do you align with the SRI Sukuk? For us, if you're an SRI Sukuk, you're tayyib inspired, right? Okay? We would take that. And then we didn't stop there. We then turned around and said, well, okay, because of the Sharia being the North Star and knowing the limitations in conventional market leading frameworks, we then turned around and asked the question, well, what about some of these other factors? And we identified 10 factors, or questions, we should say, rather than reference points, which we thought are additionality to what we have in the mainstream sustainable finance frameworks, leading mainstream sustainable finance framework. So that was the methodology we took towards our tayyib inspired platform. Does that answer your question, or are you talking about something totally different?
No, I mean, I'm just thinking that if you were to sort of propose or inspire as a framework for the Islamic banks to do with, and how is that going to look in terms of the products and services? Because clearly that within the chapter that, I just read on the little piece of it, it's just halal plus sustainability that it will come for you. Yes. But I think that my problem is that the halal definition in Malaysia is not as wide, and I'm just wondering that what's the halal definition?
So for us, of course, the scope of our work is limited to the financial markets. It's not FMCG, food, and so on and so forth. It's not that sector. Although a number of people, are you guys familiar with B Corp? Right? So a number of people said, we've been looking for an Islamic B Corp, and we really love what you're doing with tayyib. Can we build on that? Just do whatever you want. Our scope was limited purely to financial markets and to, at this phase, Islamic capital markets, right? Okay, so it's 4 asset classes in the capital market spaces, yeah, or Islamic investment market, I would say. So in your example, if you were a bank, do you have a green lending facility? That would be tayyib inspired, right? What we're not doing is, so is it tayyib inspired? So first thing is we'd have to say, is it Sharia compliant? Has the board formally signed off on this? What is the underlying structure? Is it a Ijara-based, financing model, whatever? So we just check, has it been formally signed off as Sharia compliant, which you as Bank Negara would check, right? And is it reputable boards and so on and so forth? Yes, it's regulated. We then say, okay, this is now claiming to be a kind of green financing product. We'll understand, okay, how is it green finance? Is it green lending? Is it green loans? Is it green bond principles? How is that? And we would just check and assess that. But that to us was sufficient to say tayyib inspired. We also had some additional questions, which we left as questions because we didn't want to make it a rigid framework at this stage, because we ultimately want to help encourage the development of that market. So so that's the approach that we've taken. Yeah. What we don't need to do, and neither should the scholars need to do, is decide how green is green, because we've had that debate in the mainstream world about shades of green. We know the risks on greenwashing, and if you look at all of the frameworks, SDR in the UK or SFDR across EU, These are all labeling mechanisms starting from the position of stopping greenwashing, people falsely claiming it's green when it's not, right? So that bit is important, but what we don't need to do is define the shades of green. We leave that as tayyib inspired because tayyib is optional. Halal and haram is where the option doesn't lie, right? But if you want to start going into defining tayyib and making this mandatory, because you can say this is gold star, or this is platinum, gold, silver, bronze, whatever. You can do that. You can become a rating agency if you wish to. And that's the more sophisticated approach towards it. And we're seeing that even in mainstream ESG, where they're having to split out the E, the S, and the G and have different dashboards for each one. Nothing wrong with that. But that should be an organic journey for the industry. Not for us today, when we haven't even considered the climate, we haven't even considered nature and biodiversity, and we're now going to give you a 250-point reference framework that you now need to take, and you need to get an average score. That in itself, unfortunately, that in itself reflects the quantitative nature of finance and financiers, right? When certain characteristics are innately qualitative, right? So it's like taking the difference between equality and equity. If you take the S in ESG, it's not a number. And sometimes if you take nature and biodiversity, like carbon credits, we have a singular metric for it. Nature and biodiversity, as it says, is so diverse. Trying to put a single number on it, a single unit on it, is a challenge that we often just run down in the mainstream finance. But actually, you can't really do that because it's comparing apples with oranges. So not everything requires a number, and not everything can be boiled down to a singular number. So knowing all of those challenges in mainstream sustainability, we intentionally took a principles approach to and used the word tayyib inspired rather than saying this is tayyib. Yeah.
Okay, so let's take one question. There are many questions coming from the Zoom, and we will take those interesting questions. So the first one, have you seen financial institution anywhere in the world that actually promoting responsible banking initiatives that create a positive ESG or climate change impact through ethical finance?
Yes, we have. We've seen a number of banks. We've seen a number of banks we've been around for some time. Triodos Bank is an example. There's an answer, quick answer to your question. Go look at Triodos Bank. Angus, you'll know a bunch of other banks as well that we engage with through our work at GEFI, but Triodos is definitely a leader. A lot of mainstream banks have been very serious about this. They've allocated billions of dollars for green financing only. Banks signing up to the PRB as well. So that, but those banks like Triodos are ones which have been set up explicitly with that kind of green and sustainability and social mandate.
Okay, I think Mr. Omar have answered your question. Any question from the floor? Yes, please.
So I was going to ask, I'll quickly reflect on one of the answers where you said that you still find it difficult to understand Islamic finance and
this one.
different Islamic finance and conventional finance. So as a student of knowledge, right, it's still sometimes we also find ourselves in that situation, and then we still want to further the explanation around where's that clear cut between Islamic finance and conventional finance, considering the instruments, product, and all those things that we have engineered in the recent time. And then, of course, I'm listening to a lot of Western Islamic scholars, Islamic finance experts. In the recent time, they've just been talking about, in terms of practices, right, they've been saying that they've not been able to identify the differences between them. I can mention a lot of scholars, right? Where do you stand in terms of the clear cut that you can advise us to say that, okay, this is where I believe Islamic finance is explicitly different from conventional finance? That's one. Coming to sustainability, right? There are, for asset managers and banks, when they want to do instruments, you've seen a lot of GRIs, sustainability instruments. It's quite difficult. Islamic finance is also very, very big. It's not growing because of it's going to grow because of the numbers of assets, the amount of assets that are able to push out there. But in the recent times, it's quite difficult. We're now moving away from Islamic finance to sustainable financing, and then coming up with a product that has to do with sustainability financing. It takes both time and cost overrun, which is a very serious challenge. How would you advise asset managers to navigate through that process so that they can continue to, especially for developing and underdeveloped countries where it's even very difficult to start advocating for Islamic sustainability financing?
Okay. Two good questions, slightly different questions. First of all, where do I see the clear-cut line? Yeah. That's a great question. You know where I see it? First things first is the Sharia scholars. There is an individual who sits between you and God, who's taken this amazing position that is on their head if it goes wrong, not on yours, not on mine. Yeah. Okay. So that's the joy of being a Sharia scholar and the biggest stress of being a Sharia scholar. We can do whatever we want as long as a reputable, credible scholar has said to us that it's halal. Okay? So that's the first and only definition. And we joke about it as jovial, but it's actually the Sharia scholars, subhanAllah, they have a huge, who would want to be a scholar? You're the architect between man and God, right? That sits on your head, right? I would personally never have the courage to be in that position, right? Just imagine the contingent liability on the day of Qiyamah that you have to go to. Right, hold on a minute. That's what you said. 40,000 people in, Abuja did this, 80,000 in Karachi did that, right? 2 million in Malaysia did X, right? So that's number one, fundamentally, the clear-cut thing. Of course, I can then cut that up in many different ways and answer that in different ways, but I'll give it a simple answer. That's number one. And let's never forget that. It's not on our heads, it's on their heads. We should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. A lot of armchair pundits, keyboard warriors, now is the world of social media. Everyone's got the 40-second clip that Islamic finance is the same as stuff that I would not even repeat. Frankly, I've heard from scholars, I've heard from practitioners, from others. I think we need to be more mature in our discourse. We need to be a bit more respectful, and we need to be wary of sensationalizing terms. Islamic finance is all fake, it's all this, it's all that, right? Of course, in private rooms and meetings, you still raise the question, but in an intellectual discourse, is the title of this, in a respectful and positive way, seeking solutions, not just seeking commentary and banter or whatever. So be very wary of that, and that's why I've always said things like Tayyib Inspired can only sit on the shoulders of the giants who made halal. You can't talk about Tayyib Inspired if you haven't even made halal, right? So that, I think, we need to continue the intellectual inquiry. All of you need to, particularly here in this institution, need to absolutely unpack this further, but in a progressive and humble way. It's not perfect. It isn't perfect. And we know one of the signs of the Yawm of Qiyamah is riba will be so widespread that even if you try to avoid, you get, touched by the dust of it. So someone said, right? So we know the context. We know the paradigm, right? You think overnight you're going to get something all, whiter than white? Good luck. You're not going to do it. And by the way, it all sits in human nature as well, underpinning financial systems and humans, fear and greed, innate goodness versus self-interest, as Adam Smith tried to reconcile himself. So that's number one. Number two, your second question was, what would you say to people who are trying to create these products, considering the additional operational challenges? So I find that question fascinating because it was the exact same question we were being asked at EY as consultants and people in the industry when I was sitting talking to people 20 years ago. Oh, why do Islamic? It's an extra cost. I need to pay the lawyers. I need to pay these Sharia scholars. All sorts of funny words were used, references there. I need to pay Ernst & Young. I need to change my systems. There's no market in this. Why would I do it? It doesn't make any sense. Well, actually, mashallah, all you guys have proved out that there is a market, a functioning market. Malaysia alone is now just over, I understand, over 50% of the banking market here is Sharia compliant. That's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, right? You go to, I said 14 billion of green sukuk just issued last year, right? Okay. That's nearly 6% of all sukuk are green and sustainable. Yeah. As a percentage, if you say the percentage of green and sustainable bonds to fixed normal conventional bonds, it's barely 1.6%. So there is a market and people can do it. And it's the same question, just in another form. Oh, there's extra sustainability considerations, yeah? Operationally more I need to engage a consultant. I need to put more processes in places. I need to put in more checklists, etc. Need to institute new frameworks. I need to buy data on carbon emissions and this, that, the other. Yes, you do, but there is a market there for it. But I would also profit that it's not just about the money. Sometimes it is just the right thing to do. If we want our children, our grandchildren, and the next generations, if we have a role as Khalifa fil Ard, right, we must protect this planet. Yep. And to continue with the unchecked capitalism, with the way, the modalities we've been running post-World War II, I would argue, in the Industrial Revolution, particularly, we will destroy this planet and we will destroy the ecosystem. And then who's going to clean up the mess? Yeah? And who's going to account for the mess? So the challenge, the cost, the operational headache of picking up the pieces, yeah, is going to be more than if we try and adapt today. And by the way, we're already late. We're not on track for the Paris 1.5, right? The cost for adaptation, the cost for recovery in Pakistan after the floods, the cost for recovery after typhoons and earthquakes is considerable. So don't think that you're not already paying that. Don't think there's not already an operational headache and a cost for that. It's all being baked in today already. Look at your insurance policies. Where do you think those premiums are being calculated from? Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Omar, there's another question, interesting one from online by Khadija Hassan. The question is, could you share how and what risk management strategies for natural disasters can be introduced through financial product that aligns with the sustainable Islamic finance?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, what risk strategy?
The risk management strategies for natural disasters
can be introduced
through financial products that aligns with the sustainable Islamic finance. One of the example is catastrophe bonds.
Yeah. Okay. Got you. Right. All right. So there's obviously a few things. There's insurance products that can be put in place, but catastrophe bonds and debt swaps as well, which are coming in, are very interesting. So again, with all of these, one of the key features of all of these green bonds, sustainable bonds, is actually very similar to a sukuk. The use of proceeds must be ring-fenced for a particular project. We've had examples of the vaccine sukuk that was issued, if you remember, by, I think, the World Bank, right? Khazanah here pioneered in an impact sukuk for education as well. So, yes, absolutely right. There are opportunities to do that. I can't answer your question directly. I can't list 3 Sharia-compliant catastrophe bonds, but there definitely is absolutely no reason why not. But the principle is the exact same principle that Islamic finance and Islamic product structures are used to, which is ring-fencing the funds, doing additional audit and governance to ensure the money is used for that purpose. And I think it's going to increase. I think it's only going to increase. I think there was a huge opportunity for a restoration bond that could have been put off the back of the Pakistan floods. And I think you'll see more of this coming through the markets. But typically in structuring these bonds, there's always the same old questions, in terms of, right, whose balance sheet is this actually the credit rating coming off of, right? Mm-hmm. Is it the World Bank? Is it the Gates Foundation? Is it Khazanah in this case, Mm-hmm. So really, how is this being priced? And that will always be fundamental to it. And that's where the multilateral agencies have the opportunities. But again, the other big opportunity of this is for the multilateral development organizations and the donor funds. They can use these bonds to change the cash flows. So they can collect all of this money day one from the capital markets and disperse a 200 million bond or $1 billion bond, and then pay that back over the period that their cash flows can match against it. So they're the typical features that we see in these structures and notes. And I think, if they're addressed well and positioned well, I think most people would rather happily invest in some of these type of structures than the next corporate bond from some industrial in Mercedes or some manufacturing company.
Okay, so I think this is the session is almost towards the end of this sharing session. So we will take the last question from the floor. Not the students, but the priority gives to the students.
Three of you. It's okay. Who's got the easiest question? Can I take the easiest one?
Make it short. Make it short.
The football score.
I also have a line. I will make it short. It'll be like, yeah, look at that. That's it.
You know what that means?
Why do you need to call Islamic Sustainable Finance? Because Islam already itself is sustainable. Why do we want to add sustainable?
Why did you add the word Islamic to finance then?
Okay, why? I can answer this question.
Reserve it.
I need to be, because we have to look at the world we are living now.
That's why we add sustainable.
The world we are living now, Islamic finance, Islamic economics is very recent. It's very young.
Yeah.
And before it comes, we have the Western and the modern world who already set up their ethic, their moral, their universality, and their worldview. And now Islam wants to come and to bring his worldview.
Yeah.
And now to differentiate Islamic worldview and the universal modern worldview, Western worldview, we have to put in quotation Islamic.
Yeah.
To emphasize. For me, this is the answer what I do.
So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And I will add another thing on your introduction. Asian crisis in 1998, you call it regional crisis. In the 2008 crisis, you call it global crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. You could say it's more Western. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is also another problem.
Absolutely happy.
Why? Because the Western, the modern, are the one who can influence others.
So in the Western world, because we're talking Western and I'm from the Western world, I'm a very, very proud Scot, and we invented capitalism in Adam Smith. In the Western world, you're absolutely right. In the Western world, guess what? We are changing our philosophy, and that's why we're calling it sustainable finance, yeah? Responsible finance, because we realized, as I said in the first slide, we got things wrong. We got it wrong. And the very first question, you know what I heard in summits, not in Islamic finance summits, in mainstream, oh, are you saying that everything else is, if this is responsible finance, are you saying everything else is irresponsible finance? Right? Well, I've heard this before. You know, are you saying the other one's haram finance? Is that what you're saying? You know? So you're absolutely right. You said it more eloquently than I could. It's that emphasis. And we've gone through that emphasis. And this is arguably the single most intriguing thing. There is a reset of capitalism that's happening globally. Yeah? When we started Islamic Finance, well, I didn't start it, I got involved with it. Shahimi and others, Nora Padatta, when we started, this is impossible. This is a whole set of philosophy in a completely dominant alternative world, which is dominated by Western capital markets and Western finance. You're absolutely right. But when we started, we could never even have thought that you could bring in this conversation, this narrative. No one was interested. That's why I was giving those analogies of at least for me, being young in the career in the late 90s. So we have used these terms in mainstream finance. I haven't even got to the Islamic finance bit yet, right? We've used these terms for emphasis for the exact same reason. Now, in Islamic finance, where's the net zero fund? Yeah? Where's the fund that looks at nature and biodiversity? That's it. How can we emphasize this point, yeah? As you said, emphasize. And maqasid is a word people are using here, which is a good word. SRI was a word the Securities Commission added on to Sukuk. Islamic Sustainable Finance is the terminology the UAE Central Bank has adopted as well. We coined the term Tayyib inspired. Yeah. So, alhamdulillah, there's are lots of words coming in for that emphasis that can we also look and pay a bit more attention to these critical components, which are not just profit, but people and planet as well, alongside that profit.
Okay, thank you so much. As we conclude today's session, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Omar Shaikh for his insightful presentation. And we also thanks the audience, participants from both the physical session as well as the online session for the interactive participation. And also we want to invite all the audience as well as the online participants to join our monthly intellectual discovery talk at INCEIF. Okay, so thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Before that, we have our appreciation, small token from INCEIF for your time and sharing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thank you.